tonight, we're joined by founder of Ukraine Freedom Project and executive producer of Faith Under Siege, Russia's hidden war on Ukraine's Christians, Stephen Moore. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Hey, Laura, great to be with you.
Yeah, thank you. You're a former Republican House Chief of Staff. So, that's not typically the resume you see of someone who completely packs up and moves into a war zone. You usually kind of hang around D.C. So give us a bit about your background and how you actually ended up in Ukraine.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, I got there on day 5 of the war, and the line to get into Ukraine was a lot shorter than the line to get out. And so, here's what I like to do. A lot of people talk about foreign policy. A lot of people write papers. I'm into firsthand foreign policy. I want to go and look for myself as to what's going on, because I don't want to talk about anything that I've heard secondhand or that sort of thing. So everything that I talk about is stuff I've seen myself. Or from a good source, from someone I know. And I got there day 5 of the war, started doing humanitarian work, because the international community really fell short that first year. The UN, the International Committee of the Red Cross, completely failed that first year. And so I first tried to get some friends out. I have a bunch of Ukrainian friends, and then I just started helping with the humanitarian aid.
Wow. Well, Under Siege is a topic we're very familiar with. It's the name of my husband's book. But give me sort of the what you saw on the ground there that led you to want to produce a Faith Under Siege.
Yeah, after that first year, I started. Listen, I used to be a chief of staff on Capitol Hill. I got a lot of friends there still, and so I would talk to my conservative friends in America, my friends on Capitol Hill, and they would be telling me things that were starkly different than what I saw on the ground, and so I was like, someone should do something about this, because there's not good information getting to conservatives, to Republicans, to Christians in America. At least not information that was, it was different than what I was seeing on the ground. So I started trying to get good information to folks. And one of the things that happened was I was in a co-working facility in Kyiv, kind of like a WeWork, and this guy comes up to me and said, "Hi, my name is Victor. I'm an evangelical Christian." And it's like, all right, dude. You're a little bit more evangelical than a lot of our evangelical Christians. What you got? And so Victor goes on to tell me how in 2014, he was in a city called Luhansk in eastern Ukraine that was being occupied by the Russians at that time. And he was getting groups out, families, and that sort of thing. And one day he was taking a group out that included a newborn infant and a pregnant woman, and the Russians pulled him over. They pulled him out of his truck and took him to the basement. And what this means, taking someone to the basement is a euphemism for torture. And so he was in the basement for 25 days, including one day when he was praying with his cellmate, and a Russian Orthodox priest walked by and said, "You're not Orthodox, are you?" And Victor, of course, we learned, is very forward with his faith. And Victor says, "No, sir, I'm an evangelical Christian." So they took him out of his cell, took him to the torture room, strapped him to a chair, and tased him with electricity while the Russian Orthodox priest tried to cast demons out of him for being an evangelical Christian. Yeah. Oh. I heard this, and I'm having your reaction. Yeah, it's just crazy.
I mean, that's pretty clear. I think a lot of people, first of all, I appreciate, Stephen, so much that you physically went to a place, because I love the way you say it's very different on the ground than kind of what people assume. And I've had that experience with a lot in my life. I think a lot of us in our family probably have. When you go experience something, it's a lot different than how people from the outside might view it. And so I give you a lot of credit for going there, for actually physically being on the ground. But I think a lot of people looked at what was going on over in Ukraine and they said, oh, well, this is just a geopolitical conflict. But it sounds like that may be the moment where it was pretty clear to you this was actually more of a war on faith as well.
Oh, absolutely true. This is the Russian Orthodox Church is not a church like you and I would think of one. It is a working arm of the Kremlin, and they have declared a holy war on Ukraine and the West Now, Laura, I don't know where you go to church, but my pastor didn't declare a holy war on anyone last Sunday. And and just yesterday, the patriarch, their version of a pope, Patriarch Kirill, declared that Patriarch Bartholomew, who is the leader of the Orthodox Church, representing hundreds of millions of Orthodox Christians all over the world, so Patriarch Kirill called him the Antichrist. So this is a spiritual war that we're in. And I think if you look at all our adversaries, Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, what do they all have in common? They're dark, godless countries. And there is just a shadow, a spiritual shadow in these places. They don't value human life. And that's what we're up against.
Yeah, and it feels like that spiritual battle has been going on really worldwide. I mean, I know that a lot of people have felt that here in the United States in a different context, obviously, than this, but it's pretty clear if you kind of just take a step back and look at the world, as you're saying, there has been this big spiritual battle, this back and forth between what truly feels like good versus evil. And it's not limited to the United States. It is all over the world. So I appreciate you bringing that kind of to the forefront and making people aware of that. Give people, though, an idea about what maybe happens to pastors, to priests, and generally ordinary believers when Russian forces take control of a town. How is life different for Christians living under this occupation? Maybe in Kyiv, for example, there must be some very egregious things that happen.
Well, in Kyiv, life, that Kyiv is controlled by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians, you can pray however you want. So the Ukrainians, every faith that you might imagine is in Ukraine, and there's no problems. But where the problem is the Russian territory, where the Russian occupied territory. There's 3.5 million people, and probably about 3 million of those are Christians that are in occupied Ukraine. And when the Russians come in, they meet. There's actually 4% of Ukraine is evangelical Protestants, and Baptist is the third largest denomination in Ukraine.
Wow.
Everybody's Orthodox. Then there's about 12% Catholic, and then Baptist is the next largest denomination. So a Russian soldier meets a Baptist pastor, and he says, "Oh, this is an American religion. You must be an agent of the CIA, like our guys are agents of the Kremlin." And so they will arrest them, they will interrogate them, sometimes they will torture them, sometimes they will murder them. And there's been about 80 pastors and priests who have been killed by the Russians because, again, Patriarch Kirill, the Russian Pope, has declared a holy war on Ukraine. So his followers in the Russian military are killing pastors and priests that are not Orthodox.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I don't think, Stephen, people even had the faintest idea that this sort of thing was happening out there. So it's an important topic, though, because look, we're hopeful to see an end to this war. We know that there have been multiple peace talks. We saw President Zelensky visit President Trump down at Mar-a-Lago not long ago. There's been a lot of communication, but as we're hopeful to head towards peace, what do you think Americans need to understand about what's actually at stake for faith communities in occupied Ukraine? Because the scope of this is much bigger than just Russia maybe taking control over a plot of land. There's more at stake.
Yeah. So it's not a plot of land. It's Christians, people like you and me, who cannot go to church because there's a Russian soldier standing in front of their church, or it's been completely destroyed. Something that folks do not know is that there's a town called Mariupol, which is currently occupied, and part of it is controlled by a Muslim warlord named he's a Chechen warlord his name's Kadyrov, and they have destroyed almost every church in Mariupol, and they have rebuilt the mosque, and they're shipping out, and this is classic Soviet stuff, right? They're shipping out the local people to Siberia. This is true. This is still happening. Wow. And they're bringing in Muslims from Chechnya because it's a jihad. So Kadyrov calls it a Muslim Orthodox jihad, and this is happening in Ukraine. And so so these are people that are currently in occupied Ukraine. They can't go to church. They're being replaced by Muslims, and and it's a crime to have a Bible study in your home. And if you get caught, you could be tortured and spend time in a Russian prison. So nobody wants that. Nobody in Ukraine wants to live under Russian rule. Nobody. We've polled it. 99.2% of, or let's put it the other way, 0.8% of Ukrainians say they would prefer to live under Russian rule, which is about 300,000 people. So let's find apartments for those people in Moscow.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. But because the Russians just do the worst things in the world to the Ukrainians.
Wow. It's absolutely wild. So if there's one message, one overall theme that you want, especially people of faith, to take away from A Faith Under Siege, what would that be?
Well, we are in a spiritual war. We're in a global war. All the bad guys are working together: Russia, Iran, China, North Korea. And it's important for Americans to realize this, because Americans believe that peace and prosperity is their birthright. And it can go away really quickly. And it's gone away in occupied Ukraine. So these are people like us. And I want to say one quick thing about the Ukrainian people I work with. There's 900,000 people in the Ukrainian military. All of them were doing something else on February 23rd, 2022, when the Russians invaded. Everybody. This is a great Second Amendment story. They just grabbed rifles and ran towards the Russians. And you've got, you speaking of Pilates, I know your shirt's a Pilates shirt. So my friend's yoga teacher is at the front. You've got pastors at the front. You've got, auto body repairmen, engineers, lawyers. And these are just people that's like, look, the Russians are going to kill us. I need to stop this. And I need to defend my family. And so what you don't hear about is just the fight for freedom of the Ukrainian people. And these are Christian people, and, they're not putting up with shutting down churches.
I mean, good for them. Good for them for picking up and going into battle, because quite frankly, this war could have just ended very quickly had they not had that drive to protect their country, their home, their families, etc. And, I hear President Trump say it all the time, but I think we all feel this way. We want the killing to stop, because it's not just the Ukrainians who are being killed. It's the Russian soldiers who it seems like Vladimir Putin has absolutely no regard for life whatsoever. He's just sending these kids in, and they are kids. They're so young, so many of them. And it's brutal stuff. We want it to end, and obviously for Christians around the world, we certainly want this spiritual warfare to end. But I always believe that if you maintain faith, good always triumphs over evil, and we're obviously very hopeful to see that happen in this case. So, Stephen, where can people check out your work? Where can people find more information on all of this?
Yeah, so we've got a whole series of films. The main one is A Faith Under Siege. It's about an hour long. It's been on Newsmax. It's been on CBN, TBN. Angel Studios has asked us to make a series about what we're seeing among people of faith in Ukraine. And so, you can check it out on Angel Studios. But if you go to faithundersiege.com. It's just really simple. faithundersiege.com. You can see our movie. We've got a 17-minute movie on Catholic priests. There's not a single Catholic priest left in occupied Ukraine. The Russians have either killed them or driven them out. And we made a film about this. And as is the case all over the world, the Jews are being terribly mistreated by the Russians. And you can see all this at faithundersiege.com.
Wow. Well, everybody needs to check it out. Look, we need to stay informed on everything that's going on. You get such a small amount of information if you rely on legacy media for educating yourself out there. So this is important. This is important stuff. And it's important to know overall what's going on out there around the world as it relates to faith. So great work, Stephen. Good stuff. Thank you for bringing this information to light and allowing all of us to have a better understanding of what's going on over there. So, Stephen Moore, thank you so much for joining us here on The Right View. We appreciate it. To everybody at home, as always, make sure you like, subscribe, share, and follow. And we'll see you back here next time for more.
Awesome.
And I won't back down. Hey, baby.